Russia and China are dramatically altering the global economic scene by deciding to stop using the US dollar in their trade. This significant change comes after Moscow announced new trade corridors, suggesting a possible shift in economic alliances. Curious about how this will impact global markets and your finances? Stick around as we dive into what this means for the future of international trade and economic power. Tensions between the United States and its strategic rivals, Russia and China, have been building for years. Recent developments, such as the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the escalating trade war between the US and China, have brought these tensions to a head. The world is now on the brink of a major economic transformation that could reshape global trade. By moving away from the US dollar for their trade, Russia and China are creating a major disruption in international trade. This choice not only challenges the dollar's dominance, but also indicates a shift towards a world with several influential powers. The effects of this decision are far-reaching. Russia and China are working to reduce their reliance on the American financial system by moving away from the US dollar. This strategy could also shield them from potential future sanctions from the United States. This shift presents serious challenges for the US, which has long relied on the dollar as the world's reserve currency, granting it significant economic and geopolitical influence. With major economies like Russia and China seeking alternative trade methods, the dominance of the US dollar may be at risk. The impact of this shift on the US economy and global trade remains uncertain. According to a study by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, if the use of the US dollar as a global reserve currency drops by 25%, it could reduce annual trade flows by 0.8% and lower global GDP by up to 1%. Additionally, Russia and China's new trade corridors could disrupt existing trade routes and supply chains that heavily rely on the US dollar. Data from the Council on Foreign Relations indicates that China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, now involves over 140 countries, accounting for about 40% of global trade. Recently, Russia announced that it will conduct most of its trade with China without using the US dollar. This move highlights Russia and China's commitment to reducing their reliance on the US-led economic system. By abandoning the dollar, they aim to sidestep the numerous sanctions affecting Russia's international business. These sanctions have pushed Russia and China to increase their trade with each other, which has risen by 26%, $240 billion since 2022. This year, China has become the top buyer of Russian oil. However, Russia is not solely dependent on China. It is also investing heavily in new trade routes across Asia to bypass sanctions. These new routes include two major transport corridors, one linking Russia to Kyrgyzstan via the Caspian Sea, and another extending from Belarus to Pakistan. Russia is also advancing older plans, such as the North-South Corridor, which connects Russia to the Indian Ocean through Iran. Despite some delays, Russia provided Iran €1.3 billion last year to complete its segment of the North-South route, allowing Russia to access the Persian Gulf without facing sanctions. These routes will enable Russia to access Asian markets while avoiding sanctions. Russia and Iran are also collaborating to enhance their banking systems, which will facilitate business despite Western sanctions. Since Russia's involvement in Ukraine in 2022, the US and European countries have imposed severe sanctions on Russia, making it difficult for Russia to sell oil to the West. However, using overland corridors outside of these sanctions makes it harder for Western countries to intervene. Despite this, Russia still faces challenges. Sanctions have delayed progress on the North-South route in Iran, and Russia is now lending Iran money for construction, with plans to invest about $3.5 billion in the project by 2030. US pressure is also straining Russia's relationship with China. The US is concerned that China's support for Russia might have repercussions. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken plans to discuss these concerns with Chinese President Xi Jinping. If China continues to engage with sanctioned countries like Iran or Russia, it might face sanctions from Europe and the US. Overall, US sanctions on Chinese entities could further strain relations between the US and China. Recent data from the Moscow Exchange indicates that the Chinese yuan is gaining prominence in Russia's financial markets, reflecting the increased trade between the two countries. This shift towards the yuan is part of Russia's broader strategy to reduce reliance on the US dollar and mitigate the effects of Western sanctions. By adopting the Chinese currency, Russia aims to simplify cross-border transactions and maintain economic stability despite financial challenges. Russian energy products, particularly oil and gas, have a strong market in China. While China has increased its exports of consumer goods, machinery, and technology to Russia to facilitate smoother trade. Russia and China are exploring new trade routes and corridors, including the Polar Silk Road, a potential Arctic shipping route. Both countries are also interested in developing overland trade routes through Central Asia, which would bypass traditional sea routes controlled by Western nations. Many countries, especially those facing economic difficulties or under U.S. sanctions, are actively seeking alternatives to the U.S. dollar for various reasons. Firstly, countries like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, which have faced harsh U.S. sanctions, are seeking ways to bypass the U.S.-dominated financial system. Their aim is to maintain strong economic ties with their trading partners. Secondly, holding large amounts of reserves in U.S. dollars exposes countries to fluctuations in the dollar's value. To mitigate this risk and stabilize their economies, these nations are diversifying their investments across various currencies. Lastly, the U.S. dollar's dominant position grants the United States significant influence over global financial transactions. As a result, countries are advocating for alternative payment systems and currencies to reduce their reliance on U.S.-controlled financial channels. This shift is about gaining greater control over their economic futures. Russia is sending a clear message globally. Its move to abandon the dollar is seen as a direct challenge to the United States' control over global economic and political power. This approach aims to undermine the U.S.'s ability to impose economic sanctions and exert financial control. Additionally, Russia is not only diversifying its currency use, but also strengthening its ties with China and other allies. By aligning its currency strategy with China's goal to internationalize the renminbi, Russia is enhancing its economic relationship with China and with other nations seeking to reduce their dependence on the dollar. Moreover, Russia's push for a more diverse global financial system indicates its support for a world where power is more evenly distributed, moving away from a system controlled by a single nation. This perspective favors a multipolar world order, suggesting a shift towards more balanced economic and political influence among countries. While it's too early to fully assess the impact of these changes, the efforts by Russia and other nations to distance themselves from the dollar highlight the evolving global economic landscape and a collective push for a fairer distribution of power and influence. The dominance of the U.S. dollar has been a cornerstone of America's economic power, but the growing alliance between Russia and China has ignited discussions about the dollar's future and its diminishing importance. The global financial system might adapt to new economic realities, potentially altering trade payment methods and the currencies countries hold in reserve. The dollar's future could depend on whether the U.S. can maintain its economic and political leadership in a world with multiple powerful nations. The strengthening ties between Russia and China, along with uncertainties about the dollar's dominant role, could significantly impact global economics and politics. Economically, new trading blocks and payment systems might disrupt established trade and investment patterns, possibly leading to increased economic fragmentation and the formation of distinct economic zones, which could slow globalization and economic growth. Politically, a shift in the power balance could diminish the influence of Western-led groups and rules, resulting in a world with multiple influential countries. This might heighten global tensions as major nations compete for power and pursue their economic and strategic objectives. Additionally, the interplay of economic and political issues could exacerbate existing problems like income inequality, climate change, and the effects of emerging technologies. Addressing these challenges will require new policies, international cooperation, and an ability to adapt to a rapidly changing world. How do you think Russia and China moving away from the U.S. dollar will impact the future of global economics? Share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below. Be sure to join the Revel Discovery community by hitting subscribe to stay updated on the latest economic shifts and their impact on global markets. Dive into the future of international trade with us.